So this is where the 3D printer is currently kept. It may change in the future, but it's right next to the printer, and it's in these drawers here. So this is the 3D printer right here, and what you'll notice is that in terms of opening the 3D printer, you just need to lift this all the way up, and this will stay up by itself. If you want to detach the build platform, you need to lift this lever up, and then you can slide the build platform out, and you can just take it all the way out. And you can see there's a print currently on there, but otherwise to put it back in, you slide it all the way in, and then you push this all the way down, so you can see that it's like clipping on properly along this area here too. At the bottom, what you'll see on the left hand side, just over here, that's a bar that moves across to mix the resin. In the middle here is the resin tank, and the laser is underneath this the resin as well. Down there at the back, that's a chute. Here, that's where the resin drops out of as needed. So I'm just going to close this because the resin here gets exposed to light. So try not to keep this orange cover open for too long. So you pretty much open it for what you need to do it and close it. Otherwise the ambient light will cure the resin here. At the back, here's the resin tank that you can see, and what you'll notice, I know it's a bit hard to see but it's black here, so I'm just going to turn on the light, is that there's a cap here. So this, when printing, it must be open, and the reason why it must be open is because it allows air to get in while the resin drains out. So in order to when you take this out, you make sure that this is closed, because if you don't close this and you take the resin tank out, the resin will start to drip out from the back. And there's a handle, so you just pull this up and you can take this out here, and that's where the resin comes out of, at the bottom down here. So when you put it back in, you just slide it, just clicks into place. And remember, when you start a print, or before you start a print, make sure that this cap is open, but it's not open any other time, otherwise that resin will start to drip out the back. So again, when it's in, make sure the cap is open, but when you're taking it out, make sure you close this gap, otherwise you will end up with a mess of resin everywhere along this area here too. In addition to that, I'm just going to close this again to help the light, store the light. Oh, by the way, the extra resin tanks I've decided to put up here, this one's currently empty because you can feel, the way you feel it, it's quite light, but these ones here are quite heavy. So when these run out, you might have to speak to the secretary, or in this case it's Anne, so have a chat with her to see if we can order some more resin. When you're down to the last one and you're taking the last one out of the packet, make sure you speak to her, because this takes some time to arrive, and we don't want to, we need to be helping each other to make sure that things are stocked up, because no one else will look after this as well. In the other cupboard over here, we have, this is where I've put the alcohol. Make sure these lids stay closed, because inside is isopropyl alcohol, and these lids are open. They'll evaporate and it will create a lot of fumes. Naturally though, it will evaporate as well. Over here at the back, this is a USB cable, which you can use to connect to the printer if you would like to. Otherwise, there are some tools down here at the bottom. These are to lift the print off the build platform, and in here, that's the resin as well. I haven't labeled these, but this is what I've designated them as. You've got two wash tanks. You've got a dirty one and a clean one. And this is the handle that you can use to lift the things out. So instead of having to physically grab the motors out, you can just put it in there and transfer between the two wash tanks. The wash tank on the left hand side I've designated as the dirty wash tank, so you wash it in there first, and the one on the right hand side over here is the clean wash tank. So afterwards, after rinsing it once to the dirty wash tank and soaking it for 20 minutes, which I'll explain later, you'd go and put it in the clean wash tank to give it one final rinse. Eventually the wash tanks will get filled with a lot of dissolved resin, and at that point in time will start to run out. In that time, what I tend to do in order to save this isopropyl alcohol is I will pour out the old wash tank, like this dirty wash tank. You can pour it down the sink, make sure there's just a lot of running water. I've confirmed this with Maria, the lab technician, and then you move the clean one into the dirty one, and then you get some more isopropyl alcohol and you pour it into the clean one, so that sort of saves up the resin as well. On the side here, you've got some gloves which I've kept here, some paper towels that we'll need, this strainer that we'll need as well. If anything fails, we can drain the resin out and reuse the resin, because otherwise it's quite expensive. In terms of, this is how the printer, there's a few different things. If you turn off the light, it might be a little bit better. This is the interface. It's all touch screen, so when you upload a job, you'll be able to do it. If you click on this button here, it should bring up all the past jobs that are there. This one here brings up like how much resin is left, the pretty much the status of this machine, and at the bottom down here there's a few different settings as well, which we'll go through. There's pretty much two ways to connect your laptop to the 3D printer. The one is, number one is through the Wi-Fi network, and to do that we press the button down here and we find the connectivity settings. We make sure that the printer is connected to the Wi-Fi network. Sometimes the printer might be disconnected from the Wi-Fi network because there's too many people on the network, and in order to make room it kicks things that are idle, and so since the printer isn't used very often it gets disconnected from the network. And it will ask you to add the printer on when you go into the preform, which I'll show you a bit later, and ask for IP address. And the IP address will change each time the printer is disconnected and connected. It may not be the same. So in this case the IP address is 192.168.1.138. In order to connect, if this is not connected, we can click into this, and then we find the correct Wi-Fi network, and usually there's a whole bunch of these ones here, and you just clicked on the Linksys 5G network here, and we can continue using it. The other alternative is a USB cable, which I showed before, and this USB cable just comes out of here. So if you just plug this directly into your laptop, then you'll get access to the 3D printer as well. In terms of the 3D printer, you only need access to upload the job. Once the job is uploaded into the 3D printer, which is here, and the job is already sitting here ready to print, you are more than welcome to disconnect your printer via USB or the network, and the data will already be sent. So the only time you need to connect your laptop to the 3D printer is when it's uploading the job. Once the job is uploaded, you are more than welcome to disconnect, and you don't have to be connected onto this printer for the whole 7 hours, 10 hours, or however long it's taking for you to print your job. So when you first open Preform, you'll bring this dialog box up. It's called the job setup. And what we'll notice is that the printer will be blank for you the first time you start up. Right now mine is disconnected because I'm not connected to the university network because I am at home. But the first thing you need to do is you need to add the printer. And what you can do is you can either go up to the printer and you can connect the USB cable to your computer to set a direct link. Otherwise, the easier way is probably to use Wi-Fi. And as long as we have the printer set up on the Wi-Fi as I showed previously, what we need to do is click on the drop down box, and at the top we can add the printer by this button here. When you press add, you enter the IP address that's listed on the printer that I was showing you before, and you press connect. Once you press connect, it should say that the printer is updated as well, and you can select it. And again, I can't do it because I'm at home at the moment. It will show you that it will be connected, what the model is, and how much resin is left in the cartridge. Once that is connected, the resin material is usually grey. This one you don't need to change, and the print settings we're just going to leave it as default. The layer thickness, there's two different settings, there's fixed and adaptive. At this moment I think you just stick with fixed, and here you can slide the bar along to get the different types of print thicknesses you want. 160 means that each layer thickness is 160 microns. The benefit of this is it's quite fast, but the negatives is that the layers might not cure properly and the quality is a lot lower as well. You can go all the way down to 25, but this is in beta, so I don't suggest it at the moment. At this point in time, you're probably looking at about 100. So studies have shown, and they've done proper orthodontic studies as well, if you print at 100 microns, you have enough thickness and enough detail to make sure that you get a good orthodontic model as well, and it's a little bit faster as well rather than doing 50. So what you can do is you can press apply. So the first thing that we'll see is this screen. At the bottom down here is the build platform, and what we want to do is we want to open our models up. So if we go to file, then you go to open, it will ask us for the different sets, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these two. For example, these are my two STL files I have based. I'm going to press open, and it's going to bring these models up here. What we can do is we can save it, and if we press save, what it does is it just saves what's on the build platform. It doesn't save the models itself, it's going to save the build platform itself. So if we do something, it's going to make sure that we Like for example, if we orient this model on the side, if we save it, when we open this up next time, that model will be moved to where we want it to be. So it doesn't save the model itself, it just saves the orientation of the models onto this build platform here. So I've just saved it as print 1. What we can do is the next button down here is the one-click print. I usually don't use this because we want to set up these models in a certain way to make it easier for ourselves later on. The next button is the size, and what we can do is we can make the models bigger or we can make them smaller, but usually these STL files are a 1:1 ratio, so we don't want to touch this, otherwise the teeth and everything will be out of ratio and not the correct size. The next thing is orientation. We can either click Orient All and the machine will put the models in the position that it thinks it's best, but obviously it doesn't do the best orientation. So what we want to do is we actually want to select the base. So we want to, once we click this button, there's this arrow and we can select, yep, that's where I want the base, and that's where I want the base, because we want the model sitting down flat like this for easier printing. You can print the models standing up like this, and the benefit of this, you can fit more models onto the build platform, but then you will have things such as overhangs and problems like that. So usually, and it's highly recommended by Dental Access, the company that installed the 3D printer, is that we print the models sitting down rather than standing up and trying to fit more on it, because there will be less problems and less print failures. Once we've decided that that's the orientation of the models, we can press done. And the next thing we can do is this button down here is supports, but we don't need any at the moment if we're just printing straight up models like this. If we're doing surgery models, we will need to use supports, and I can show you that a little bit later. This is the layout button. We can press the layout all if we really want to, and that will set the models up wherever the printer thinks it's best, but we actually don't want to set this up the same way. And the reason is we want these undercuts to be facing outside. So we can later on get a lever underneath here and flick it up. If you think about it here, if we want to remove this model, it will be quite difficult because getting the lever in the middle of the build platform without hitting this model is going to be difficult. So in terms of this, when we click on the model, we can click on this bar and we can move the model around the build platform wherever we like. Alternatively, we can also spin the model as well in a 3D ball. And there's some other ones that you can do. You can tilt the model like this as well, but we really don't want to touch that because we want it to be sitting flat. So what we want to do is we want to move this towards the edge. Click on this one and we want to spin it around so that, again, the undercuts are facing outside. So again, that's not correct. So we want to face it outside. It doesn't really matter where, but we just want to put it here. This is just saying mixer side, and the reason why there's some labels at the front. So this is the front of the printer, and this is the mixer side. Generally, you want to put all the models as you can, as close as you can to the mixer side, because that's where the laser starts from. So I guess it's getting a little bit technical. I don't think it really matters too much in our scenario, but if you can, put the models maybe more towards the mixer side. So have it here rather than have it, for example, on the other side of the build platform. It just make the prints go a little bit faster. So that's it. So that's how we set up the model for simple like study model 3D printing. On the side here, I'm just going to quickly go through the columns on the right. It has some details. For example, the print time is 1 hour and 30 minutes. If we change the print thickness, that we did before in this print button up here, over here, if we just change it, let's say to about 50 and press apply, the print time will go up. So we leave it about 100 microns as discussed before. It's telling us it's about 147 layers, and the volume is about 25 mils of resin. Each resin tank is about 1 liter, so we can, according to this, print 40 sets of models. And then we come down here, and these are different things that we need to look for. These are the warning signs. What it's saying here is that the printability is not very good because it doesn't like us building directly on the build platform. But since with these models and we've got these undercuts here, that's a warning that we actually can avoid, as we don't need to elevate these models at the moment. They will come off quite easily. The ones that we need to look for is show minima and show cups. These are pretty much overhangs, and these are properly suction points, and I can go through that a little bit later there for you. So once we set up all the models, you can place as many as you can fitting on here without them overlapping. You can press print. start a print, and if you press this, you will select the printer, making sure again that it's connected. You can name the job. So for example, I can just name my Matthew, and I'm just going to put a patient name, let's say Sarah. Well, it's not really, but so I know that's the name, and I will press this upload job. I can't press it right now because I'm not connected to the printer, but once you're connected via the Wi-Fi USB, this button will not be grayed out. You should be able to press upload, and when you press upload, what will happen is that it will take a few minutes. There's a bar up here that says it's uploading the job. This is the only time you need to be connected to the 3D printer. Once the job is uploaded, then you can disconnect yourself from the 3D printer, so you don't need to be there the whole time. And then go to the 3D printer itself, go to the front screen, and press start the job. So what I'm going to do briefly now is just to tell you how the 3D printer works. And what I mean by that is, in terms of the 3D printer, it's a little bit different. So this is the build platform. This is the piece that sits on top of the printer. So in actual fact, that this is actually upside down. So if you have to think about it, this is actually the top part of the printer, and this is the bottom part of the printer. If you have a look at the 3D printer again, you notice the build platform, the part that actually goes into the resin, is on the underside. So they flipped this up to allow us to see what's going on, but you've got to remember that this is where the resin is at the top up here, like the pool of resin, and this is where the build platform is, and the handle is actually underneath here. The part that you clip and unclip is at the bottom down here. And the reason why this is important is because this is how the 3D printer works in our case. So what happens is that each layer, it builds it up slowly. And the reason why I'm explaining this is you might encounter some errors later on, and this will explain why and the errors and how you can solve them. So this is the first layer, and as you can see, as I'm going up the layers and I'm dragging this up, what's happening is that the printer will have this build platform immersed in resin, and it'll be touching the resin tank at the bottom down here. A laser will go along, and it will pretty much specifically cure parts of the resin, and once it's done with this layer, the whole build platform will lift up out of the resin tank. The machine will do a wipe to make sure we get some fresh resin, and then this will sink back down to the build platform, and then the laser will go ahead and center the next layer, and this process will repeat, building the layer up. So what's happening is that each part of the resin is sticking to an old part of the model as well. So they're pretty much building up on top of each other, such as this. And each layer is going to be very thin. It's going to only be around 100 microns, depending on what we selected before. So usually with these models where everything is quite upright, there's no problem because everything is stuck quite well to each other. And the reason I'm explaining this is sometimes when we do surgery models, I know this one isn't prepped properly, but I'm just going to show it quickly to you as well. So what I'm going to do, the orientation, select base, because I want it to be this way. And I know this is very thick and not correctly done, but I just want to show you some examples here. So what you notice here is that when I put this on the build platform, you've got some unsupported parts, and you can see unsupported minima detected. And what it's trying to say is that at a certain point, that this part of the bracket, it's like an overhang, it's not sticking to anything. And what I mean by that is we started at the build platform at the bottom down here. As you can see that as I'm going up here, each part is connected to each other, and I will continue going up. And once I hit a bracket though, what you'll notice, and I'm going to keep going up, is that here, as we start printing out the brackets or the overhangs of these brackets, when it prints this layer out, there's nothing for it to stick onto, so it's hanging in mid-air. So when the build platform detaches, it's not going to keep these parts here because there's nothing for these parts to stick onto. It's just going to float in the resin, and it's going to cause a print failure. So as we keep going up, like for example, the next layer isn't going to stick next to this because the problem is that the very first part, which is this part here, isn't sticking to anything. So we need something to hold on to it, and that's where supports come into play. So if we click here and supports, we can click on this model, and what we can do is we can generate supports. There's different rafts that you can do at this point in time. A full raft, I can just show you quickly. A full raft means that it generates like a raft at the bottom and it has the supports going up. Usually you don't need this because it's usually I feel like it's a little bit overkill. But the more important thing is the supports. And what the supports do is they pretty much make a connection between that and the top part. So this is a full raft. You can see it all down at the bottom. Usually we don't need this. What we can normally do, because it increases the build height, so the higher the build is, the longer it takes to print. So we don't want this. And let's say we just generate mini rafts. Just to save on time, I've just done this as mini rafts, so you can see it's not a full proper raft, but it still has lifted up the model quite a fair bit. This will actually take a lot of time as well, so I'm just going to undo that. Or you can just press clear. We're just going to go with no rafts. And this is probably the best option. So this is the no rafts option, which I think is the best because it reduces the build time along this area here too, because it's not lifting the whole model up. And what we'll notice is that it's actually generated some supports. And what supports are pretty much, it's just pieces of resin that are printed in addition to the model, and they actually stick onto the model. And the benefits of this is it gives that floating part that we're talking about before a connection point to the build platform. These ones are easily breakable, like you can just run your finger and they'll crack right off. But what I mean again is that as we're going up along here, it's just a different color because it's showing you a support, is that you start to see these supports come up. But when we hit the bracket, which is these parts here, you can see it's connected to something now. It's connected to the model, or at least it's connected to the build platform here. So they're not overhangs. So the printer is able to go to the next level. Without these supports, this bracket, this overhang at the bottom down here, has nothing to connect to, and it will just break off and float around in the resin tank, causing further prints to fail along the area there too. Why don't we put supports everywhere? The problem with supports is that when you do break them off, it's not a completely clean surface. It might not be completely smooth. So once the print is finished, you can remove the print from the 3D printer. To do that, it's usually good to get a pair of gloves and you just lift this up. Once you lift this up, you need to lift this bar up and then you can disconnect the build platform from it. Once you disconnect the build platform, it's a really good idea just to make sure you close this lid again, to make sure that resin doesn't set. And what you'll see is that there's still quite a bit of resin on this print, and as we mentioned before, now we can see the value of angulating the models as we angulate it and having the undercuts, because it'll be really easy to remove. So what we need to do, ideally you would have two hands, and because I have one hand, this is going to be quite difficult and I might not be able to, but you'll get one of these instruments here, and then you can insert it underneath the undercut that you have, and you pretty much just want to lever it off in this action. You'll need two hands to do it. When you do this, the model will pop off, but it shouldn't break. You can use either one, whatever's easier, and you can see how it's a lot easier to lever it off because the triangle undercut is on the outside here. When you lever it off, you just pretty much need to pop it off. So let's say you knock the models off. Sometimes it's easy to do this in a larger area, so you can use the lab area over there to do it, but otherwise you just need to lift the lid, make sure that this one here is at the bottom, and then you can drop your models in. Once the models are dropped in, you can agitate it slightly. You don't have to do it by a lot. Leave it in there for about 20 minutes, come back. Okay, to make this more easier, I've actually just popped off the models just then. stopping the camera so I can use both my hands, and I'll just literally put them in here. Okay, it doesn't matter which way you want to go, and you can agitate it a few times just to get rid of most of the resin, but you don't have to actively scrub. So you just let it sit there for about 20 minutes, and once it's, remember to close the lids after you're done. But let's say we do this and then 20 minutes has passed, then we can lift this one up, grab this, and then I'm not going to do it because this hasn't been 20 minutes and I don't want to dirty the resin too much, but you just put in here, shake it a few times, and then everything will be done along this area here too. Okay, and then once you're done, you take the models out, you can dry them on a piece of plastic to make sure they don't stick to anything, and then you try to return everything to the correct setup, so closing the lids, making sure before you go. The next part is the cleanup, and this step is really important to make sure that the next person is able to use it and the resin doesn't cure. So right now, when the models are sitting there for 20 minutes, we can go ahead and clean this build platform up and clean up the instruments. And the best way to do it is not through water, but we want to use alcohol. So we just get a bit of paper towel, we can dip it in this dirty resin, it doesn't really matter too much. But what we'll do, again, it'll be easier with two hands, but you need to really wipe this build platform clean. Okay, so you go ahead and wipe this build platform, making sure that there's resin on the sides here, so we wipe up the sides as well. So pretty much when you're finished wiping isopropyl alcohol with this should be absolutely clean. In terms of that, you would do the same with the instruments here, so I'm just going to quickly do that. So I'll wipe this up and this is completely clean. As you're having a look at the sides, there's no resin anywhere, and you want to do this to allow the next person, when they do the 3D printing, that everything works well for them as well. So that's it, that's the build platform nice and clean after wiping down with isopropyl alcohol. And what we're going to do is we're just going to lift this up, and we're going to put the build platform back in like this, as so, and we're just going to click this down, making sure it's sitting all the way down. Wonderful, and we're going to close this orange lid again, and this one here will now be ready for the next print. So pretty much what you want to do is you want to set this up for the next print, so whenever the next person does it, they can just press print and go ahead. So just clean up after yourself pretty much. So make sure the build platform is clean and wiped and there's nothing on there. The cap at the back is open, and if you notice that your print has failed, then you might have to do a print cleanup as well, which I can give you a link to that as well. But again, just make sure that when you're doing something, make sure it's ready for the next person, otherwise their print might not work if they don't realize that someone hasn't cleaned up before them.